A poached egg on wheels, a car nicknamed after a crustacean, a three-wheeler that became a national joke before it became a national treasure. Britain in the 1960s built cars that dealers struggled to sell and neighbors struggled not to snigger at. Awkward shapes, unfashionable engineering, badges nobody wanted stitched onto bonnets nobody trusted. Motoring critics were often cruel. Buyers were sometimes crueler. Yet decades later, in garages and at classic car shows up and down the country, these same machines are treated like royalty. Something changed. Something always does. This is the countdown of 10 cars Britain once laughed at and now can't stop loving. Number 10. Wolseley Hornet. Imagine spending extra money on a Mini, only to be handed something the press called one of the ugliest cars ever sold to the public. That was the verdict small car magazine delivered on the Wolseley Hornet when it appeared in 1961, a car built by grafting a traditional upright grille and a stubby boot onto BMC's already famous small car. Critics were baffled by the idea entirely. Why dress up something so proudly minimalist? Car magazine's LJK Setright went further, suggesting it existed purely to flatter buyers too snobbish to admit they simply wanted a Mini. The mechanical package was identical underneath, right down to the driving experience that had made the standard car a sensation. What has shifted is perspective. Today's enthusiasts don't see a confused compromise. They see one of the more distinctive-looking members of the Mini family, a curious footnote in BMC's badge engineering habit that has become a talking point at any classic gathering. Its rarity today only adds to the appeal. And BMC's next oddity was, in its own way, even harder to explain. Number 9. Ford Anglia 105e. A rear window that leaned the wrong way. That was the detail everyone noticed first about the Anglia when it launched in 1959. Its backward slanting glass borrowed loosely from American design trends and dropped straight into suburban England. Some found it striking. Others simply found it strange, a car that looked like it was reversing even when parked still. Underneath sat Ford's brand new 997cc Kent engine, a genuinely significant piece of engineering that would go on to power generations of British cars, yet the styling dominated every conversation. Was that leaning glass a gimmick, or was Ford quietly solving a headroom problem nobody else had bothered to address? The rear slanted design actually gave taller rear passengers noticeably more room. 6 decades on, the Anglia's oddity has become its signature. Collectors now chase that reverse-raked rear screen specifically because nothing else looks quite like it, and a certain flying Ford in a beloved film franchise only deepened the affection. What began as a talking point has become the entire reason people want one. Number 8. Vauxhall Viva HA. Some cars are mocked for looking strange. This one was mocked for barely looking like anything at all. When Vauxhall's first small car in a generation appeared in 1963, one contemporary verdict called it simply a funny-looking thing, not outrageous, not offensive, just oddly forgettable next to sharper rivals from Ford and Triumph. Built on Opel Kadett underpinnings and dressed in resolutely plain sheet metal, the Viva HA leaned entirely on substance rather than showmanship. That substance turned out to be considerable. A 4-speed all-synchromesh gearbox, rack and pinion steering and optional front disc brakes gave it genuine ability that its styling never advertised. Over 300,000 buyers agreed it was worth having, even if nobody was bragging about how it looked in the driveway. Today, plainness reads differently. Surviving Vivas are treasured precisely because they represent honest, unpretentious 1960s motoring, untouched by flash or fashion. Would you have chosen function over flair back then? Vauxhall's next small car took the opposite gamble entirely, reliability over reputation, and reputation lost badly at first. Number 7. Hillman Imp. Roots Group needed a giant killer to take on the Mini. What they built instead nearly destroyed the company's name. Launched in 1963 from a brand new factory in Linwood, Scotland, the Hillman Imp arrived with a genuinely clever all-aluminium 875cc engine mounted at the rear, independent suspension all-round, and a gearbox with synchromesh on every gear, engineering that should have embarrassed the Mini, not chased it. Instead, inexperienced production staff and rushed development led to serious early reliability problems. Mechanics unfamiliar with the alloy engine routinely over-tightened bolts, causing failures that had nothing to do with the design itself. The damage to its reputation happened within months and never fully healed, even after most faults were fixed by 1965. Yet the very engineering that got the imp into trouble is exactly what enthusiasts admire now: that rear-mounted layout, that free-revving engine, that agile handling. It became, almost accidentally, a genuinely enjoyable car to drive fast. Few 1960s Britons could have predicted this little unreliable car aging into a cult favorite. Number 6. Reliant Regal. Few cars have endured more good-natured ridicule on British television than this one. The three-wheeled Reliant Regal, produced from 1963 using fiberglass bodywork over a simple chassis, existed largely to exploit a tax loophole that classed three-wheelers as motorcycles rather than cars. That made it cheaper to buy, insure, and register, hugely appealing to buyers on tight budgets throughout the 1960s. It was never glamorous. Its stability on three wheels became a national punchline, and decades later it would be forever associated with a fictional pair of wheeler-dealer brothers and their battered yellow van. What's easy to forget is how seriously the Regal was engineered and how reliably it served ordinary families for years of genuine daily use. Today it occupies a strange, wonderful place in British affection, mocked in scripts, adored in reality. Owners restore them not despite the jokes but because of them, keeping alive a very particular kind of homegrown, budget-conscious ingenuity. Few oddities capture 1960s Britain quite so completely. Number 5. Austin 1800 Land Crab. An Australian journalist watched these cars corner sideways during a rally and joked they looked like crabs scuttling across the tarmac. The name stuck immediately, and it wasn't kind. Launched in 1964 with Alec Isigonis at the design helm, the Austin 1800 was unusually wide and low for its class, with running boards along its flanks and heavily rounded window corners that gave it a slightly hunched, ungainly stance. Buyers weren't quite sure what it was meant to be: too large and stark to feel like an upmarket saloon, too eccentric to feel conventional. Underneath, though, sat genuinely sophisticated engineering, a 1798cc engine, front-wheel drive, and hydroelastic suspension that delivered a supple, comfortable ride few rivals could match. It was even named Car of the Year in 1965 by industry judges who saw past the styling. Modern enthusiasts increasingly agree, treating the Land Crab as a thinking person's classic proof that Isigonis prioritized clever packaging over flattering curves, and that history has finally caught up with his logic. Number 4. Austin Maxi. The Times' own motoring correspondent compared its gearbox to stirring treacle with a long thin cane. That was the verdict on the Austin Maxi when it launched in April 1969, a car rushed into showrooms with a genuinely troublesome cable-operated gear change and an underpowered 1485cc engine that struggled uphill. The interior looked plain, the styling was politely described as pudding-like, and BMC's own launch brochure asked the oddly deflating question, "What's so new about the Austin Maxi?" Critics piled on, and sales limped along at a fraction of what Austin had predicted. Buried beneath the botched launch, though, sat a genuinely radical car, Britain's first proper 5-door hatchback, with a 5-speed gearbox nobody else offered and rear seats that folded flat into a load bay. Once the cable gear change was replaced with sturdier rods in 1970, that cleverness finally had room to breathe. Modern enthusiasts now recognize the Maxi as years ahead of its rivals, a genuine template for the family hatchback that Britain simply wasn't ready to appreciate in 1969. Number 3. Triumph Herald. Standard Triumph's engineers had a problem nobody wanted to admit publicly: no supplier willing to build them a modern, one-piece body. Their solution, unveiled in 1959, was something increasingly rare by the decade: a car built on an old-fashioned separate chassis with bolt-on panels, at a time when rivals were rapidly moving to unitary construction. Critics saw it as a step backwards dressed up in Michelotti's sharp Italian styling. The Herald's independent rear suspension, meanwhile, used a swing axle arrangement that could famously tuck the inner wheel under during hard cornering, earning it a reputation among enthusiasts for unpredictable handling at the limit. And yet, That same bolt-together chassis proved to be a stroke of genius rather than a compromise. It allowed Standard Triumph to build saloons, convertibles, estates and, eventually, the sports cars that became the Spitfire and GT6 from a single shared platform. Today, that flexibility and famously easy home mechanic access are exactly why Heralds survive in such healthy numbers, turning an old-fashioned solution into a lasting virtue. Number 2. Ford Corsair. Ford gave this car a sharp, Thunderbird-inspired nose and vertical taillights borrowed loosely from its own luxury Zodiac. The result, launched in October 1963, struck many as confused rather than confident American-style styling grafted awkwardly onto a stretched Cortina body underneath. Road testers weren't much kinder about what came later. The Essex V4 engine introduced in 1965 was criticized for uneven idling and a coarse, rough-edged feel utterly at odds with its sleek exterior promises. Sales limped to roughly 300,000 over 7 years, a disappointing return next to the Cortina it was meant to complement, and when production ended in 1970 the vast majority were quietly scrapped and forgotten. Fewer than 400 are thought to survive in Britain today. That scarcity has transformed the Corsair's fortunes entirely. Its distinctive V-shaped snout, once dismissed as derivative and try-hard, now reads as genuinely bold among the more conservative saloons of its era, a rare survivor whose oddity finally looks like ambition rather than confusion. Number 1. Hillman Hunter. Nobody expected much from Roots Group's mid-sized family saloon when it appeared in 1966, following years of the company's declining fortunes and a reputation battered by the Imp's early troubles. Journalists treated it as competent but unremarkable, a conventional four-door saloon competing in an already crowded class against the Cortina and the 1800. Few imagined this ordinary car had anything extraordinary left to prove. Then, in 1968, a largely standard Hunter driven by Andrew Cohen won the grueling London to Sydney Marathon, a 10,000-mile endurance rally that humiliated factory teams from Porsche, Citroën, and BMC. It repeated the feat with a strong showing in the 1970 London to Mexico World Cup rally. Suddenly, a car nobody had taken seriously had beaten the world's finest on the toughest stages imaginable. That victory transformed the Hunter's reputation almost overnight, proving genuine toughness lay beneath its unremarkable styling. It remains the clearest example on this list of a car dismissed at launch and celebrated ever since, the strongest possible answer to a question this whole countdown has been asking. 10 cars, 10 reputations rebuilt. Some were mocked for their looks, some for their engineering, some simply for arriving in the wrong decade at the wrong moment. Motoring history rarely judges fairly in real time. Critics chase fashion, buyers chase status, and genuinely clever engineering often gets buried beneath first impressions. Given enough distance, though, Britain tends to forgive, then admire, then adore. The cars people once crossed the street to avoid are now the ones drawing crowds at classic shows every summer. So here's a question worth sitting with: which of today's overlooked, unfashionable cars will Britain be celebrating decades from now? We'd love to hear your guess.